All right. Well, welcome back to another SCARS podcast. I'm here with Gabe Woolley, who is an Oklahoma state representative out of District 98, Broken Arrow, and Tulsa. He's a man of many talents. He has a lot of experience. I would sort of call him an expert witness in a lot of different areas, and so I'm really excited about this conversation. And we're going to start off right off the bat with a really tragic situation that happened yesterday, and I want you to tell us about some of the things that you've studied and done. But this is the tragic incident in Minneapolis yesterday, where they had a shooting in a Catholic church, and it happened to be this person professed to be a transgender, and you have a documentary that you've done stating exactly a lot on sort of the background of that, and I just would like to hear your side of what you think you've discovered through your documentary.
Yeah, I mean, it's a growing issue that we're seeing, this identity crisis. I would refer to it as an identity crisis because the transgenderism aspect of it is sort of at the front because it is growing rapidly. It's infiltrated the classroom, it's infiltrated society, and we're seeing negative consequences of that identity struggle, much like the shooting that took place recently. But this also can encompass more LGBTQ political agendas, same-sex attraction, homosexuality, lesbianism, and things like this. Ultimately, my take on it is a counterfeit that's offered when people can't come to terms with things they're struggling with. They embrace an emotional reaction over a logical reaction, and they lean into their feelings of what they want and what they desire and what they feel they cannot change. Many people would make the argument they feel that they're born this way, and we see that with the transgender argument too, but I would actually push back and make the argument that it's more of a spiritual and psychological trauma that begins at one point and is now being fostered by society, pushing people down this path of self-destruction. And eventually, when that's internalized for too long, you will start to see the external consequences of it, similar to leading to this shooting, or someone with self-harm, or someone projecting that identity and trying to foster it and encourage it in someone else. I think it's a pride issue. I think it's an attack on nature, and I think it's an attack on the image of God. We're made in the image of God. So to distort that, the enemy can only pervert and twist. The enemy cannot create. He can only manipulate what has been created. And so to take male and female and put them out of their place through homosexuality or transgenderism would be a direct attack on the image of God and the creation of God. Since the enemy cannot destroy God himself, he can do the best he can to destroy the creation of God, which is a mirroring image of Christ.
Now, you in your documentary, you followed 3 individuals, and all of them were female, as I recall, and they were wanting to transition to male.
What we found during this research project is that there is a larger amount of shame associated with men who have said they want to be a woman and come back to being a man because of a lot of male culture around that. It is easier for women to come forward and tell their story of what they have been through. Men, there's a larger shame component. So we struggled to find former transgender men, but we found it easier to find women that were willing to come forward. And that plays a role in the male brain versus the female brain. Certainly, it's an emotional topic. It's a traumatic topic, and generally speaking, men have more issues discussing emotional and traumatic things. They tend to typically internalize things more. Women tend to be more communicative, and they tend to be willing to look for external help and are more likely to seek therapy. And so we found that when we had this project, the people that responded to us that we were able to get on camera were women. Not to say that some men haven't. We've seen other stories, but this was very specific to Oklahoma. So our selection pool was very limited. It was an Oklahoma story. So we found that, again, it was much harder for men to come forward with their story. So this film did end up being all women in the project. Of course, we also interviewed parents of current transgender children, parents whose children are still transgender and are estranged from their family. And then we also interviewed psychologists, and we had interviewed some lawmakers at the time, but we didn't put that part in the film. So it was a research project based around psychology, the spiritual aspect, and a road to redemption for those that left the transgender lifestyle behind. Detransitioners is what you call them.
Was there a common theme to these three individuals that caused them to even think that they were not born how God intended them to be?
Yeah, I think one thing you could highlight, and I look at myself too, I was never transgender, but I struggled with my own identity. Common theme you would typically see would be stemming usually back to the family structure and to the father and to the mother. And so these women would often have some sort of unhealthy or estranged relationship with their father or mother that would cause them to try to pursue masculinity elsewhere. So
Like they weren't getting attention from
right,
the parents,
right,
and maybe the boys were in the family, or
yeah. So what you'll see, children need certain amount of attention from their mother and from their father to come out balanced and healthy. So up until the age of 2, a lot of it relies very heavily on the connection with the mother. The mother's carrying the child in the womb. The mother is typically at home, breastfeeding and nurturing, and the father is at work providing, and the father is obviously need to be involved from conception all the way to birth too. But the children will typically rely very heavily on that emotional and safety connection with the mother from conception to the age of 2. Once they surpass the age of 2, they're going to lean very heavy into the connection and relationship with their father. Because this point, they're crawling, they're trying to talk, and they're trying to walk. And so they're playing with things, tearing apart, they're roughhousing. Well, typically who leans more inclined towards roughhousing would be men.
sure,
They would be the more physical being in that sense of that physical interaction. Not to say that women can't. This is a generalization. So then we would see that if they were losing or not having a healthy relationship with their father, hopefully their biological father, from the age of 2 and up, they would typically, if they had missed out on that masculinity part, they would seek masculinity elsewhere in the world. And they themselves, the women, would try to be the masculine figure that they were missing in their own lives. And so they would see what they wanted, right?
Mm-hmm.
They wanted a man in their life, a father in this case. They didn't have it. And so you aspire to become what you didn't have. We see this in human sociology all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Men go to the gym because they aspire to look fit. They probably are seeing other men that are fit and saying, I want to look like that. Women are seeing women online that are very fit and very healthy and very beautiful, and the makeup industry has capitalized on this. Women are seeing, I want to be like that. They're putting on something, working their body out, putting on makeup, taking on the latest fashion, because they want to become what they've idolized. And so these transgender individuals were lacking something in their life. For these 3 women, it was most likely a masculine, healthy, consistent figure and role model. And so they are subconsciously, they're not doing this consciously. They're not thinking, I didn't have a father, so I'm going to become a man. No one typically does that. You do it subconsciously. Your spirit and your mind and your subconscious are pursuing something and you don't realize it. So these women were pursuing masculinity because they were lacking healthy masculinity in their life, particularly from a father figure.
Do you think that, because I know there's probably people out there going, well, I didn't have that, and I didn't want to change my sex or change, cut body parts off or add body parts. Do you think there's something that happens in certain people that at birth, maybe I know there's a lot of hormones going on. There's things that can happen at birth that might give you a more propensity to look that way.
And what I'm going to need to do at some point, I might need to look it up. I need to give credit to the person that I got this from, because it's not my original research on this
we can
too.
cite it. Mm-hmm.
So we will make sure. I just can't think of his name off the top of my head, so I apologize. But we will give him credit because I am citing many things that he explained in a podcast.
Do you want to look it up real quick?
Resonated with me, with my own experience, and made sense to me. I had recently watched an interview on the Lila Rose podcast, okay? She typically advocates for pro-life against abortion, but she's been getting more into other ideological things like homosexuality and transgenderism. She recently interviewed Dr. Nicolosi Jr.
Mm-hmm.
I watched this episode, and why I feel confident in sharing this is his research, not mine.
Okay.
Why I feel confident in sharing it, though, is because what he was saying I would see mirrored in my own life when I struggled with my own sexual identity. And I was also able to see the parallels when we were making Trans Oklahoma and researching this topic. So this is his work that I can attest is accurate from my own personal experience and our own research. Our research is aligning with what he's saying. So I can confidently speak on this, but I want people to know that it is Dr. Nicolosi Jr. that is highlighting some of the studies that I'm going to reference or the alignment. But also I've seen it in my own life too. And I had a feeling, and then he said it and I was like, okay, no, I knew I had a feeling was right on that. I attribute that to the Holy Spirit, but give credit where credit is due.
Sure.
So I just wanted to make sure that we mentioned that this is some of this will be referenced from this episode of the Lila Rose podcast with Dr. Nicolosi Jr.
So what did he discover in terms of like that early childhood development or every infant embryonic development? What happened? Is there empirical, at least correlation to say there is a difference sometimes?
Yes. And so when we're talking about this difference that you're highlighting, he was talking about homosexuality, but she also asked about transgenderism and she asked about lesbianism. Basically, what we can talk about is any detour from heterosexuality and how that could be. Because you had asked the question, well, what about people that did not have a father in the home, didn't have a healthy relationship with the father or the mother, but they didn't turn out to be homosexual or transgender?
Correct.
What he alludes to is that there is very likely must have been another substitute male figure, an older sibling, a grandfather, a teacher, or a mentor, or very commonly, because of public education and the way education is structured, peers.
Okay.
So for me growing up, I was more emotionally connected to my mother. My father was more emotionally distant, hard to connect with. He was physically present in the home. My mother, sort of through her behaviors, demanded more attention from the children. My father less. So I clung to the feminine.
Right.
And I did not know how to embrace the masculine. Therefore, I moved on and tried to embrace the masculine through a homosexual lifestyle subconsciously. I'm not thinking this as I'm doing it. It's happening in a spiritual and mental. And they say that they believe there's a gay gene. There's no gay gene. There's a disruption of biology and the way that men and women were wired to be. There's a disruption in the human brain and a traumatic experience. And you can see this with sexual fetishes and things like this too, as to why people have certain preferences when it comes to things sexually and identity. But there's typically a traumatic experience that could happen anywhere in utero to the end of our life. Anywhere in our lifespan, I believe life begins at conception. And
Yes,
there's always the spiritual component, and we are spiritual beings by nature. Should we choose to embrace the Holy Spirit and walk down that life, that's a choice to do. And so he basically, I had seen another clip. This is not Dr. Nicolosi. This is something else I had looked into. But there are traumatic experiences that will happen in our lives that can set a sexual trajectory behavior. Sexuality is a spiritual connection. It's supposed to be a spiritual connection between a man and a woman, which is marriage, and it's solidified with the act of sex. And so there's an attempt to pervert that and to twist that. And so we see pornography, homosexuality, transgenderism, anything to disrupt the nuclear family and to disrupt life and to seek to kill, steal, and destroy. And so basically what they had said was that if there's a moment of trauma, your brain was damaged or scared by that. And so your brain will try to go back in time, which is not possible, and try to rescue you from that moment of trauma and give you a hit of dopamine, which is pleasure, instead of the negative feeling you experienced. So if you see people that are acting out a certain way sexually on things, you see all kinds of weird fetishes, violence, trying to pretend like you're the opposite sex. You see, I forget the symptom where people are sexually aroused by dressing up as the opposite sex. Autogonophilia. There's something that happened in that person's life that was potentially a traumatic experience, and their brain has said, whenever you go back and think of that experience, or whenever you encounter it out in the real world, like maybe a man that reminds you of the man that sexually abused you, or maybe a father figure and you didn't have yours, you could get a hit of dopamine with that and therefore be sexually attracted to it, because the brain is trying to avoid that trauma, that the damage, the fear you felt, is trying to replace the fear, the damage, and the trauma with a positive feeling of dopamine. So then we begin sexualizing. Sexuality comes on top of it, and we find people that could be embracing homosexuality, lesbianism, transgenderism, or maybe in straight relationships or some sort of sexual fetish that's not healthy, because they're wanting that hit of dopamine that is now associated with that risky behavior.
So I would look at it and say, well, if you're a man and you say I'm really a woman, then that's a dangerous, and you say, I'm going to transition to that. Well, we know statistically now that's a very dangerous operation. It's wrought with problems the rest of your life. If you delve into that, there are no normal functions after that. It's a constant battle the rest of your life. So that's like saying, well, I don't like my right hand. I feel like I should only have a left hand. I know I'm minimizing this, but if I had a dopamine hit that said, yeah, you don't need that right hand, it feels better if all I had was left. And I said, I'm going to cut this off. That would be a problem, right? Most people would say, probably not a good idea, Chad. Might not want to do that. That makes me feel what you're saying is that even though we know that's a dangerous outcome, maybe it's not advertised as such, but when you research it certainly is to cut your genitals off and try to reform them, then that's what you're saying is that somewhere in that line, there was at least a positive feeling for that. And then you have other information coming in from the world that says, yeah, that's a good idea.
A person felt uncomfortable with how they were because they desired to be something else. And it was affirmed through the way that they dressed or through their peers or through their teacher. And they would get some level of dopamine or at least comfort from that affirmation. So it wouldn't be dopamine pleasure to cut off your hand. That act wouldn't bring you that pleasure.
Right.
But the desire to want to be a man become a woman and feeling like you can get closer to that by cutting off your genitals, that is trying to embrace that desired image and make yourself what you think you should be. If a man thinks he should be a woman, he's moving closer to embracing and cosplaying a woman. And that, at the end of the day, they think could bring them a sense of comfort, a sense of meaning, and in some levels, maybe a sense of dopamine, certainly.
So what do you think, the last 5 years, 6 years, seems like there's been a larger focus on affirming who you think you are by the world, not only by the world, but by and large by schools as well, allowing certain things, transgender book hour, different things, not in this state, but in other states. Why the push in your opinion, over the last 5 years? Why such a heightened sense of this?
I think there are multiple contributing factors. I do believe that to an extent there are other forces that want to weaken America. We're the greatest nation in the world.
Amen.
We're the wealthiest nation in the world. We have a lot going for us. It would make sense. I think warfare has changed in a lot of ways. Clearly, obviously, we see a lot of things that take place in the Middle East. But in America, where we have one of the largest and best militaries in the world, a particular strategy that could potentially be successful, because we could physically potentially defend ourselves very well, would be rather mental warfare and ideological warfare. So the objective would be, if you couldn't infiltrate a nation from the outside on a physical level, you instead would infiltrate them from the inside by influencing their own people and turning them on each other and creating, as we've seen in our history, some sort of civil war.
You can get real biblical with this talk track that you're on, because I see you, brother. It's definitely like, if we look at the Revelation, we know that all nations will turn towards Israel.
Yeah.
We are the greatest defender in America of Israel right now. If you were able to turn that tide somehow, some way, you're really bringing on prophecy.
Oh yeah, and obviously America is a large ally to Israel. There's a lot of conflict and discussion around the Israel topic, and I don't know that I'll get too deep into that, because I have not researched that enough. I'm a Christian, and I understand that that Israel and the Jews are the lineage in which Jesus chose to come to earth and deliver the people. He chose that. God does everything for a reason, and I have respect for that.
He did say they're stiff-necked people.
we have the current conflict of the Israeli governments,
right?
Which is
different than the people.
Which is different than the bloodline in which God has chosen. Every human still has free will, and I believe.
But get back to what you're saying, because I think you term it fifth generation warfare.
Yeah,
it's not warfare of planes and guns and things like that. It's between the ears.
Yeah, and so why I believe we are seeing a growth in this transgender ideology, and potentially a result of that was the recent shooting at the Catholic Church.
Yep.
why is this transgenderism, despite the extreme negative consequences, continuing to be pushed? And why can some people not see it for what it is and connect two and two together? That mental illness was contributing to this person's behavior that caused them to lash out and harm and kill other people. Where's the disconnect? And so I believe there are two things. There are other nations and other governments and other entities, and on a spiritual level to an enemy that seeks to bring down America and seeks to bring down a Christian nation. And so I believe that there is infiltration through social media ideologies. A lot of it comes from the universities that are pumping out teachers into the classrooms. A lot of it has infiltrated K through 12. It happens here in Oklahoma. I have documentation of pride flags, Black Lives Matter flags in the classroom. I have pulled the books off of shelves in libraries I've worked at as a teacher. No one can tell me this isn't happening when I've seen it with my own eyes. And I've had to
again, that expert witness.
And I've had to report it myself for the safety of my students. And I've had to call parents and say, I'm sorry, your child has been exposed to this book and to this ideology. I was not aware of it, but I need to contact you now because they've already seen it. And I don't know what you need to do about that. And I had to report it to administration. So there is an objective to infiltrate from the inside on a nation that has a strong military. If you can create warfare amongst each other through political parties and through political agendas on the inside, we could tear each other apart and weaken each other, making ourselves a easier target. That's what we want to prevent. That's what typically Republicans and conservatives generally and the church wants to prevent from happening. Hence why we're combating this transgender ideology, which is just one example of how we're being weakened from the inside. But another part of it is obviously the spiritual component and why we see this growth. Why we see this growth, aside from weakening a nation and making us a larger target for something, is there's this argument of feelings versus facts and reality. And there basically is this nonsensical argument going around of if you feel it, you should embrace it, and that's true, and you should give into every feeling. If every person gave into every feeling they had that brought them pleasure or peace or some sort of comfort, where would we be? But there is a movement that they want to say feeling is truth, and there's a total illogical argument that you should give in to whatever makes you comfortable, because there's an avoidance of discomfort. Humans naturally want to avoid discomfort. We don't want to feel pain. We don't want to feel discomfort. We want to feel pleasure, and we want to be in a state of, what is it, homostasis?
Homostasis.
Where we're just level and we're calm. That is what the body and the brain naturally crave. So if if your brain and your trajectory has gone on a certain path and you're now pursuing these levels of dopamine and you're now pursuing this level of comfort and you're having people affirm it around you, anything that disrupts that is a threat. And to embrace and to go against the grain and to go against your own feelings and to pursue truth in biology the way God made it to be is uncomfortable. The Bible literally tells us that growth and development, and C.S. Lewis highlights this in his book called The Problem of Pain, that pain, through the process of pain and striving for better is painful, and through pain and suffering comes righteousness, that it's uncomfortable. So we want to avoid the discomfort. So therefore, if people have something that they just can't overcome and they feel they were born gay and there's a gay gene and there's nothing you can do about it, it's easier to accept that argument than to push against it, because in our brains, we can't explain it away. So it's better to just give into it. Least resistance, least discomfort. It's easier to find yourself and find a group of people that will affirm it. And therefore, no war and conflict has to take place in you. And you can just remain at that homeostasis level. I'm probably using the wrong word there.
No, that's exactly what I mean. Equilibrium and things that, you know, like, but do you think that, like yesterday's tragedy, that sort of there's a way to live out becoming, like, this is a man wanting to become a woman. You live that out before you actually do it, especially males. And then there's a lot of pleasure in that. And then there's a possibility that you look around and say, what would prevent me from doing that? Is there something that's trying to prevent me? Maybe it's the church. Maybe it's whatever it is. And so you act out on that is trying to prevent you to become who you think you should be.
Yeah, there are threats to our ideology everywhere. And many people look at the church as a threat to that ideology, because Christians who have a respect for God and his creation and a love for people will not affirm a false identity. You don't have to go out and scream in their face. You don't have to debate against them. You can love them, but you can not accept the lie that they're embracing.
I'm glad you brought that point up, because a lot of people say, well, that's not loving if you don't accept who they think they are. I think that's the exact opposite of love. If I lie to you and I'm not honest with you, how am I loving you? And that's a very key point to make.
Love is discipline. So Jesus walked in love and he never detoured from it in his time on earth. So that argument, they would have to say, if they're a Christian and they believe the Bible's real, when Jesus walked into the temple and drew a whip and whipped them out and flipped over tables, either Jesus was loving or he wasn't. So he either is God or he's not. There's no in between.
Right.
Was that discipline and that reaction, which we didn't see happen on a regular basis, was that still love, or is Jesus himself, who is love, is he not? Do we believe it or not? There are times where there needs to be a more aggressive approach, and it still isn't a detour from love. Should you be doing that all the time? Should you be seeking to do that? No, because then you're just kind of seeking conflict for clicks and likes, and I don't agree with that. But if Jesus was the perfect embodiment of love, and we also see in Scripture these other things that he did to drive out corruption and to call something like it was when it was appropriate to do in his judgment, which was always correct because he was receiving directly from the Father, his guidance, then that would bring forth the argument that to not affirm someone and to speak the truth is still an act of love. It's about how you do it.
Sure,
you can believe something that's true and deliver it in an abusive way.
Yes.
And therefore it's damaging.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the intent of the heart. James says the tongue can give life or it can give death. That's you can still deliver that. But I think about like, what were the parents like with this situation in Minneapolis where what was he living with in the home? And I know we don't probably know all of that, but was this being, to your point, was it being treated lovingly? Was this person treated as an outcast because they were, dressing a certain way? The family didn't like it, and so the dad was very harsh with it. But the dad wasn't living their life under God. And so, do you think that has any play with them acting this thing out or continuing this in a very negative, tragic way?
Well, I think with this individual that committed these horrible acts, I think that the acts themselves, regardless of him identifying as transgender, is a product and a result that he was lacking some sort of love and discipline in his life somewhere. When you resort to violence, you've become a man that has no self-control. Violence should be able to be controlled and used only when absolutely necessary. Self-defense, if the nation or the military is defending themselves, if you're defending your home, the right to bear arms, if you're protecting your wife or your children, a man should be able to harness aggression when it's necessary. If a man cannot control it and takes it out on innocent people, he lacks self-control. So I would debate, I don't know this person, I would argue that they probably didn't have a stable male figure in their life consistently to model what it meant to be a man, that potentially could have had some sort of disruption with their relationship with their mother to feel they need to identify as a woman and to embrace and try to find that femininity somewhere else or in themselves and become the thing that they never had, like their mother, so to become a feminine figure themselves.
Right.
And the violent behavior, there was not a father that was at least present in the home teaching this child and modeling for this man what discipline looks like. Therefore, having an emotional reaction and letting things fester inside and not allowing anyone in to have a conversation and to process the thoughts resulted in a physical outlash resulting because of a lack of discipline.
Well, this is awesome discussion. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come right back to it. All right, welcome back to the second part of the Scars podcast with Gabe Woolley here, and we're going in some deep stuff. We're going to get back a little bit into, before we kind of move on, and maybe this is going to wrap into the next section more so, but one of the things about this manifesto that it's come out pretty quick. That's pretty rare for the manifesto to surface as fast on this tragedy that happened yesterday. But one of the magazines that he used, unfortunately, he had writings on all of it. And one of them says, "Where's your God now?" Almost to say that, is your God going to save you now? My question to you is do you feel like, what do you feel like the church, how's the church playing a role in loving people that might have this ideology? Are they helping them? Are they pushing them out? Are they speaking truth to them?
Well, the church that I grew up in my observation of the church, and I spoke with our pastor yesterday, does not get into this topic of sexuality, and therefore we're paying the price of it. So if the kingdom of God and his people do not fill a void or a need, it will not remain void. The world will fill it instead. So it's either going to be the church or it's going to be the world. And if it's not the church, that's the church's fault. And so, I mean, yeah, I would imagine that this individual was alluding and probably telling us that there was some aspect of religion in play here with this tragedy. So at the end of the day, it is also still human beings that make up the church, and therefore we have our defaults. We are not God. We never will be. So a lot of people are wounded and hurt from the church because they're wounded by people, but they project that onto God because all the people in the church are talking about God and are attributing everything to God. So therefore they think that God is the one that hurt them. So the people hurt them and God gets blamed for it because the whole culture of the church revolves around God. And it's this issue where people can't see God physically, but I can physically see you. So therefore you get the blame for it because you're the one that claims God and you hurt me. So therefore it must be your God that did this. So they are projecting their responses to the harm caused by God and by the enemy, Satan himself, and they're projecting that onto God and essentially giving God the credit for harm and for wrong because there is, because of the claim and the identity that people are wearing as Christians. They're in Christ. And so I'm spacing something that I was thinking here. Oh, this is a theory, okay? But I heard this and it made sense to me. So people can look this up. They can agree or disagree. I believe in having the conversation about something. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm not saying I'm wrong. I'm saying we should have the conversation about it. And this is controversial, okay?
Love it. That's what
I
it's
listened
about.
to a podcast called Pod for Israel. And this podcast talks about carrying the Lord's name in vain. Actually, what it talks about is, what does it mean to say the Lord's name in vain? What we think that means is saying GD, God damn this, right? What he says when he translated back to the Greek, to carry the Lord's name in vain, to speak the Lord's name in vain, actually the word speak wasn't there, it was carry. To carry the name, to proclaim you are a Christian.
That's right.
In vain.
That's right.
And to not actually be moved and changed by the Holy Spirit. You are saying you're a Christian, but you're not walking that out in your life. And we can make mistakes, but that's where repentance comes in. But typically the ones who would be carrying the Lord's name in vain are not repentant of that. It's the pride, it's the counterfeit, it's the Pharisees. To carry the Lord's name in vain, which today has been translated to say the Lord's name in vain, and I think people think that means to cuss. I don't know that that's what it meant. I'm not going to say definitely not. I'm not a scholar in this area. I'm just presenting this other argument that to carry the Lord's name in vain. So people who have potentially could have just carried the Lord's name in vain, or maybe they are Christians and they just got it wrong when their flesh took over. They've hurt someone else. This person has attributed that to the church, potentially rightfully so, meaning there were some Christians or people in the church that harmed this individual and made that mistake and sinned. And this is the consequence of sin. And we don't get out of it just because we give our lives to Jesus. We have to battle with it for as long as we're here on earth. We do know where we're going in the end, but we still war in the spiritual. And it is portrayed through flesh and blood, but it's actually spiritual. And so this person who's writing this on this material, where is your God now? It clearly has had some sort of wound from the church and is projecting this onto God himself. But obviously you and I know God is not responsible. We have free will and we have sin that came into the world, and God is just being given the blame in this situation.
So I said I wasn't going to do it at break. I'm going to do it because the Spirit opened it up right here. Okay, so you're 100% right. Whoever this podcast is, and I would look back and say it's because we've become so biblically illiterate. Most of what we do as Christians is we take little excerpts of the New Testament. Maybe we read a verse or something like that daily. you don't know the totality of God until you understand His entire Word, and you'll never know that. But if you're not reading the Bible from front to back, you are going to be deceived by the enemy, right? And so you're 100% right. That's a misnomer today. Is that using one of the commandments, using the Lord's name in vain, is to curse.
To take the Lord's name in vain. I think that even if they were correct with the translation on to take, I think take means to pick it up and carry the Lord's name, not to speak the, you know.
If you've been blessed by God and you know it, and you said, man, He saved me out of that. If you don't tell someone else about that, that is using the Lord's name in vain. You've got to tell people that's what happened. If not, why did He die on the cross? Why did He do all that for us? Okay, so that is taking the Lord's name in vain. Now, I'm going to shift a little bit and say, because we're in the church of Laodicea, and I see it everywhere, we're so lukewarm as a church. 66% of the volume of the Bible is the Old Testament. Probably 3% of pastors are teaching out of the Old Testament today. Why? Why would you leave out 66%? So what are you leaving out? You're leaving out a lot of good stories in there of the fallen ones, of the sons of renown, of why did we have the flood? Why was there a flood of Noah? We know of Noah, but why? Well, if you know the Bible, then you know that there was fallen ones. You know that they were beasts that procreated with human women, and there was a hybrid that was born out. Why did that happen? Because the enemy didn't get cast out of heaven from God because he said, I'm going to be better than you. He said, I'm going to be like you, God. And he was cast down. And so this whole time, this whole game of Satan is to corrupt that beautiful line of family that God was trying to create, okay? A family of his, and we're to be co-heirs with him. Okay, so I look at this and I say, well, if this has been attempted before to try to corrupt the gene pool of God
and attack the image of Christ, which is human beings,
100%. So God doesn't make a mistake, right? He knits you in your mother's womb the way that He wants to. So if you can be convinced that you were born with the wrong genitalia, okay, there takes a lot of convincing to get to that point. So what is the next step to normalize this? There is this thing called transhumanism, and we talked about it on the break, but it's basically in the essence of post-human. So what would it be? Right there in the description, you can look it up. It's going to say, what does it look like to be post-human? That's to not look like the image of God, right? So in your opinion, and this is melding science, like maybe Elon Musk-ish, implanting chips in the brain to be able to extend life, to maybe have a longer life, maybe live forever on Earth. Melding this human and data, right? What do you think is in your study of the Bible? Do you see that as a possibility of normalizing transgenderism to get to the means of continue to corrupt God's perfect image?
Well, in the examples that you laid out, there would be the devil, Satan, trying to actually moving forward and through his efforts creating the Nephilim, right? Mm-hmm. Breeding humans with the fallen angels, like a twisting and a corruption of God's creation and a counterfeit of it, not the way God intended it to be. Transgenderism would be trying to take a human and shift it into the preferred version of it. So again, twisting,
shape shifting. That's I've never heard of it put that way. That's interesting.
Twisting and making a counterfeit, because the enemy cannot create; he can only take what God has made and pervert it, right? And then this idea that you've laid out, this theory that you've laid out of transhumanism, would seem like it could align with these two other examples, and that it would be another attempt to take what God has created, which is human, and to try to extend that life and make another version of it, and build this, this tower of Babel, an attempt to reach God, to be God, to have enlightenment, and it would be pride,
right?
It would be thinking that what God did was not good enough, therefore I need to make a better or my own version of it, to fit my own comfort and my own desires. So I could see the parallel between all of them with that argument.
Going back to somebody's going to say, well, gosh, this is a mental affirming of somebody. They're happier after they do this. And when you were doing your documentary, you're doing your study, did you look much into the actual statistics behind people that transition from the people that detransition? Are they happier when they transition? What does the actual data say?
What we found, and we spoke to some doctors and things like this too, and Janelle Batts, who is her and her husband are the owners of Red River Creative Media. They did some of this research beforehand, but even before I jumped onto the project. But what she says, so I'll just kind of loosely quote what she has told me from their research, is she's found out that on average with these women and with other transgenders as well, male, female, there is about a 5-year honeymoon phase where everything's good and they're comfortable living as transgender.
Okay.
After about that 5-year mark, they start to have the regret. There's literally physical and mental problems with what they've done to their body, much of it irreversible, and that regret starts to set in. Now, I believe that an individual could go further down the line and past that 5-year mark if they are surrounded by a community that continues to foster it and to encourage it, and they have no reason to embrace any discomfort. They're surrounded by pleasure and surrounded by affirmation, so why would it'll go beyond 5 years? Because they're living in a world that is continuing to push it forward and keep them comfortable. But when reality sets in, and the people, so you see a lot of celebrities in Hollywood pushing the transgender issue
all over the place.
Those people don't deal with our problems. They can pay their problems away. They don't have the same here on earth discomforts that the average everyday middle class and poor American has to deal with. They can pay for the therapy, they can pay for the distraction, they can pay for the trip to Hawaii, they can go out of country, they can constantly go to the next party and continue to distract themselves from their own trauma and their own problems, prolonging. This is why the Bible says it's better to be a poor man than a rich man. It alludes to this idea, because money, if it's not used for the kingdom of God, God is looking for people to trust with money as a tool for the kingdom. But when you take it yourself and you don't use it as a tool for the kingdom, you think you're invincible, and it's harder to enter the kingdom of God because you don't think you need God, because you can pay money and pursue other pleasures and options and avoid discomfort. So why would Hollywood and why would celebrities care? They're not dealing with the issues that we're dealing with. They're very comfortable being able to promote transgenderism and to push this idea. It's not a reality that they're living with. And if they're encouraging their children to be transgender, they can do it in a much more comfortable setting. They can afford much more medical help. They can afford so much more that the average everyday person who's suffering through that, reality hits them sooner.
Well, let's face it. They seek attention. Copious amounts of attention. So that's the next thing. It's the next great handbag, Gucci handbag to have. Unfortunately, this is very awful because their kids are going to suffer from it. Right? But,
I'm sure
for them, they're getting attention.
And there's other people and other agendas feeding it into Hollywood, putting it in the movies, trying to normalize it, putting it into the music industry and things like this. I think people are literally getting paid to do that. So that's one way that it'll, again, yes, Hollywood, everyone's human and they have to deal with this, sure, but not in the same way that the average 9-to-5 worker has to deal with the consequences of what you advertise.
That's right.
And put up and displayed on a big billboard as desirable. We embraced it, don't have the resources to get out of it or to distract ourselves, and we have to deal with the on the ground consequences of it. Hollywood doesn't have to deal with it the same way.
Yeah, I agree. All right, let's get into your story. Let's get into, before I leave that real quick, and maybe we'll come, I want to lead into this story, and then I'm going to ask a question about it. It's a tough question, but I think it's important. It's very important. But tell me your story. Okay.
Just how I am here today. That's
kind of like just, run. I know it's a long story, but we're gonna condense it down and.
There's resources for people to dig deeper into it, so I can just go through and tell you where to find and all that. So I'm currently a state representative. So how did I get here as a state representative? I'm working on other media ventures too, independent Christian media, things like this, things that God has put on my heart that we're pursuing and in the early stages of. But I am a state representative. This is my first year in office. This next year will be my second year. How did God get me into politics? Why am I here? I grew up in a conservative Christian home. My parents were very patriotic. My favorite movie is The Patriot. I've watched it over 100 times.
I love that movie.
I love Mel Gibson and his work. Apocalypto is another good one. That's not
man.
American patriotism, but it's very family oriented and survival oriented. Yeah. I love Mel Gibson's work, Passion of the Christ. I'm so excited for his next movie.
Oh man.
We grew up patriotic. We watched The Patriot probably once a year. My mom had us memorize patriotic songs. They were fun to sing. She's so proud to live in America. We were always a middle class family, sometimes lower class. You know, we had struggles. There were times my mom added milk to the water to make it last another couple days. But at the end of the day, it was our faith that kept us grounded. And we were raised in a Christian home, raised with conservative principles. There's divorce and affairs and everything with grandparents and stuff. But my parents and all our aunts and uncles, the very next generation, they all found Christ, helped their parents find Christ later, and it changed the trajectory of our whole family. Now everybody down is at least had some encounter and been raised in the church, all the cousins and everything. So my parents and their siblings were the turnaround for my generation and my family. So I had the benefit of being raised in a Christian home and in a conservative home, right? But that doesn't make me a Christian. I have to make that choice for myself. But at least I was given the foundation, and a child was trained up in the way in which he should go, which he will not stray far from or will come back to, like the prodigal son.
That's right.
So I had a benefit there with the way the parents chose to raise me, and money was not a huge factor in that, because they certainly didn't have a lot of money, but it didn't cost them anything monetary to raise me in faith and in the church. So there was that huge benefit to it. But nonetheless, as humans do, we still struggle. My dad was always present and provided for the family, but he was emotionally distant. His father was an alcoholic, so he did not inherit the fatherly skills to connect emotionally with people. Yeah. He was never abusive in my family, but he did not know how to emotionally connect at the appropriate age and time, which is from the ages of 2 and up for males specifically, but obviously 2 and lower is important too. That's more the mother. But 2 and up, children need that physical connection with their father. And there were times, it's not like he never was, but not consistently. And he dealt with some issues from his own father being an alcoholic. He didn't know how to model and be the right father at that time. They've changed now. There's a whole change now. But so we grew up in a Christian home, but nonetheless, because of that struggle and just being human and the issues that we dealt with, my mother was very clingy with us kids and very much sought the attention from her children and had a good connection with us, but it was almost overbearing to a certain extent. So we had hyper feminine and lower masculine in the home as far as a healthy ideal where everyone should be, how they should be physically and present and like that. But my parents are great. I don't want anyone to, this is just, everybody deals with something. Right. And so my sister struggled very heavily with not having that foundation. I think that attributed for her seeking attention elsewhere. She got into a world of drugs. She chipped her tooth in an accident, got on medication, found out at school she could sell the medication for money, got connected with drugs and drug dealers, and graduated on to meth, marijuana, ecstasy, and other drugs. So she struggled with drugs, got pregnant from 2 separate men, had 2 separate children, 2 boys, Clayton and Elijah, and abused drugs while she was pregnant with them. So there were some health issues. And so my parents, raising us in a pretty stable home, I mean, there were some emotional things and stuff, but it was a safe, Christian, stable home. It was, a 2-parent household. They were married. They were at least trying to constantly better themselves. It was a good home. Took custody of the boys while my sister was in a drug rehabilitation program. And Elijah, at 14 months old in my parents' home, died in the middle of the night. Remember, she abused drugs while she was pregnant with him. The autopsy also showed he had pneumonia in his system. There were a number of contributing factors to him having health problems. He was in and out of the doctor, constantly being cared for, had trouble eating, keeping food down, had trouble going to the bathroom. Clearly, the drugs had done something to his body development. And so I'm not a medical expert, but just putting 2 and 2 together in my opinion. And so Elijah died at 14 months old in the middle of the night. And 911 was called, and a detective out of Wagner County, Oklahoma, he predetermined before he even arrived on site. He was talking, there were people on site at my parents' home. I was living in Edmond, an hour and 45 minutes away in college. Someone told him it looks like a case of SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. The ambulance was there, and then the undersheriff was there, or the assistant detective was there. This lead detective that leads the charge on the investigation was not there yet. So he had not seen any evidence. He had not seen the scene. He had not been able to come in neutrally and let the evidence speak for himself. He predetermined en route in his car before he got there that there's no such thing as SIDS, and he knows he's on his way to a murder scene. Because apparently he had seen this before. Come to find out, he interviews my pastor and my sister on 2 separate occasions, tells them a personal story after interviewing all the family. You know, he says, I raised my niece and I needed to go away to school. And I know your family's a Christian family, and we've interviewed all these friends of yours and all these people, and they talk about that you're a good family, and they didn't see any evidence of any crime or any abuse. And they answered us genuinely. Just because he alluded to this, I'm paraphrasing, just because your family is a Christian family, I don't think that they're any better, because I had a niece and I took care of her, helped take care of her, and I needed to go away to school, and I gave her into the care of deacons of our church, and they sexually abused her, and I don't think your parents as Christians are any better than them. So he had a personal vendetta from the shame he carries from putting her in a home where she was abused. And now he sees what he thinks is another child being abused in a Christian home, and he wants to vindicate himself through our story because he carries shame from what happened to her. That is what he said, and that's my theory as to why he did that. And so my parents are falsely accused of murder and child abuse. There's a medical examiner's report that supposedly lays out this child abuse. I have heard rumor that this detective was in the room when the autopsy was being performed. That would be a huge conflict of interest, in my opinion. I don't care if people say that happens all the time. That's how it's done. A medical examiner should be looking at the body and determining what the body says. Right. Not hearing someone whisper in their ear, look for this, do that. Again, I have heard a rumor he was in the room during the autopsy. I don't care what people say. I think that's unprofessional. You go in the room yourself and you let the evidence speak for itself without any influence from anyone. That is how you should investigate. Innocent until proven guilty. Lady Justice should be wearing a blindfold, letting the evidence present itself and let facts come forward. But that likely was not the case. And so district attorney ended up pressing charges. And this is all from what the detective found. So the detective just passes it to the district attorney, passes it. They trust the expertise coming before them, and they just, And so the district attorney presses charges for murder and child abuse. And my parents go to jail twice, 4 months each, for 8 months for crimes they did not commit. In fact, they even tell you, I had a podcast called the Rescue Clayton Podcast, and I interviewed each family member, and they'll go into detail for their own specific experiences in jail and all these things. Many inmates in the jail, these are repeated criminals, and they know they are. They don't say that they're innocent. They're in there for drugs. They get caught again. Like, they're in and out of jail a lot. My parents are not supposed to be there. They are like a sore eye standing out amongst everybody. Right. These inmates who have lived a criminal lifestyle, made mistakes in their life, would constantly say, you are not supposed to be in here. Like, why are you here? Like, we know what criminals look like and how they behave. You guys are weird. Like, you guys are out of the box. I don't know why you're here. In fact, my parents went on to lead Bible studies in the jail, lead people to Christ, and all these things while they were there. They ended up making the best of the time in a place they weren't supposed to be in. Yeah. And so my aunt.
Modern day Joseph.
Yeah, my aunt bought a bunch of Bibles and sent them to the jail, and my parents could distribute them and held Bible studies. It was great. And so God used that, and I think that was part of the purpose. And so my parents, all charges are dropped in 2021. Dr. Robert Block, who was one of the top experts in the state of Oklahoma, and I think in the nation, for medical examinations on child deaths, he looked at the same evidence, the DNA samples from Elijah's body, autopsy pictures, everything. He looked at it neutrally, the way that, in my opinion, the first medical expert should have done. And this guy has much more experience. Like, this Dr. Robert Block is used by the state of Oklahoma. They call upon him to testify in court in favor of the state to prosecute people. But he said, well, I looked at the evidence, and I'm paraphrasing, and I'm just going to tell you the way it is. This baby was not sexually abused and not murdered. There's no evidence. The DNA does not say that. And I don't know how your medical examiner came to that conclusion. Then there was another expert, I believe his name was Dr. Schmidt from Michigan. And my understanding, he works as a professor, and he teaches other medical examiners how to become he and then they go out into the world or into the United States and become a medical expert. He trains them.
Mm-hmm.
He went through the DNA samples, the same one from the autopsy report. And I sat in on the courtroom during this presentation. He went slide by slide. If this child was sexually abused, this is what you'll see. And he points at the slide and he said, and it's not there. And this is where it should be, and it's not there. This bruise, this tear, this mark, this tissue would be here. And I'm not a medical expert, so I can't say I don't know what the words were, but I remember the image being on screen, and he points and said, and it's not there. That's if this were sexual abuse, you would have to see these signs from the body, because the body talks, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, and it's not there.
Hmm.
And so we rely more heavily on Dr. Robert Block because he's from Oklahoma, and but Dr. Smith was helpful too, and debunked everything as well. And so after those reports, specifically it was Dr. Robert Block's report. Clay Loney used to work for Fox 23. He tells a little bit about this story. He's in the documentary Saving Clayton, which is on YouTube, and you can watch the story. They drop the charges. The district attorney makes a quote, and I'm going to misquote it, but it's along the lines of, at one point we thought this was murder and child abuse. After Dr. Block's testimony, we can no longer say that. Therefore, I had to dismiss the charges. And so they dropped the charges. My parents have been out of jail at this time. All charges are dropped and dismissed. They tried to charge my family, not me, whether it be my sister or my parents, 27 different times, 27 different ways, and nothing worked. Nothing would stick. They couldn't produce the evidence.
The evidence
for it.
wasn't there.
They just refused to give it up. They're like, we're not going to be wrong here.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to find something because we're too far in. We're too far deep with this.
Well, yeah,
it's already
reputation depends on it,
It's
right?
already been in the media. Mm-hmm. Like, this is my theory. I'm speaking to what I believe here from from observing their behavior. And so all charges are dropped in 2021. But in 2018, when Elijah passed away, Clayton was taken by DHS, the Department of Human Services, which is understandable.
The brother.
Yeah. I'm a teacher. I'm a mandated reporter. I understand when DHS is necessary. But once charges are dropped and the reason you took the child has now been debunked, you should have to return the child to the home.
Right.
That's not the case because there's a legal...
So that didn't happen or hasn't happened?
He's been gone now for 7.5 years, pushing 8 years.
Wow.
Since 2018. In fact, he's been put in at one point, and he still is there. He's been put into a legal guardianship. So he's not in foster care. He's not a ward of the state. He's been given a legal guardianship to his biological aunt on his father's side, whom Clayton never knew because that side of the family never wanted anything to do with Clayton. They literally said, he's your problem, not our problem. They wouldn't even refer to him by name. I believe, this is a theory, I believe that there was more incentive when a paycheck came with the child. The government will pay me to care for the child, because she also had his 2 stepbrothers, and she was, I believe, getting a paycheck for that too.
Okay.
Right, the more kids. Interestingly enough, so when Clayton goes to this home, he runs away from home. The police have to bring him back. We know this because neighbors found our website and contacted us and said, your nephew is in my front yard hiding behind a car right now, or was yesterday. And he's played with our kids before, and he talks about things he doesn't like that happened in this home he's in. And then we got a report from someone that used to work at Clayton's school, and she's saying the same thing. And these people don't know each other. And she's saying, Clayton has disclosed things that he doesn't feel comfortable or safe in his home, where he currently is with this aunt, this guardian. And then we get a call from a coworker of the aunt and someone who works with her. And he calls and he's like, I am worried for your nephew. And I heard about your documentary, and I have heard her disclose potentially abusive behavior to these boys she's taking care of. And so I wanted to report it, and that's recorded. We have that documented. And so all these stories, and incredibly, DHS won't do anything about it, but a judge did order that Clayton's 2 half-brothers be removed from the home because of the alleged abuse. But Clayton's still there. But not
Clayton.
No, yeah, Clayton's still there. It's like the most corrupt thing that is out of a movie. That doesn't really happen, but it does thing.
Well, you're a voice to. I'm sure that you're not the only one in the entire country that this, or your family isn't. So you've now gone on to become an Oklahoma State. Is that what drove you to be a state representative?
Yeah. So these people that through their poor judgment,
or inspired you, I guess I should say.
Yeah. These people, these elected officials, district attorney, sheriff, detective appointed by the sheriff, government people, overstepped, violated constitutional rights, in my opinion, attributed to the abuse of a child, and refused to see it, I don't know if they believe themselves or if they believe it's wrong and they're just too far in. I don't know why, but I know something's wrong, and I know at the end of the day, it's their pride that we're battling. Their refusal to be wrong,
again, huh?
or their refusal to be able to see that they could potentially be wrong. That's pride. That's what pride does. Pride literally hurts people, kills people, damages people. The school shooting, Clayton being displaced from his home. This is the product of pride, right? Families being destroyed and torn apart. And so, yeah, it's an ongoing issue. You know, we have gone all the way up to the governor, asked for his help. Governor's father, John Stitt, is in the Saving Clayton documentary, advocating for my families. Talked to us for years. Continued. I've had meetings face to face with Governor Kevin Stitt. When I came in as a freshman legislator, I thought the meeting we were going to have was about what bills do you want to run this year. You know, like I thought it was a typical freshman meeting, get to know you. He wanted to talk about Clayton. He wanted to talk about, you know, is this why you ran for office? So I laid everything out, everything I'm telling you. I never heard anything back from his office. I've written him letters, so about DHS, things like this. I haven't gotten a response. So I don't know who he consults with and how they decided that. You know, I don't know. I didn't get any response, so I don't know how that story ended on their end. But I've pursued the governor with it. And because he asked. I didn't go in there and say, let's talk about my nephew. I went in with a list of my bills prepared to talk about that, and he decided to talk about my nephew's story, which is fine. I didn't mind sharing it with him. So I don't know, you know, that was seemed like a dead end. I don't know what he knows. I don't know who he talked to. I don't know. I'm not going to make claims for what I don't know after that meeting. So, but there have been other people. There have been several senators and representatives before I ran for office that advocated for my family and still continue to advocate. So I saw, well, this is happening in my district, and my own representative is not doing anything about it, and it's his constituents. So, in general, why I ran for office was because I had a rude awakening and a personal experience with government overreach, a weaponized justice system against the people, and a huge lack of pride that causes damage to society. And I didn't feel my state representative.
An overstatement of pride, you would say. Yeah. Not a lack of it, but overstatement of pride.
I'm sorry. I apologize. Yeah. Yes. A huge pride issue, in my opinion. And our state representative, being the representative in the district where this has taken place, and other things have happened too, hasn't done anything about it. So it's kind of like, well, if you're not going to do anything about it, I'll do it myself.
Right.
So I ran for office. I ran and campaigned on transparency, pushing back on government overreach, lowering taxes, anything that was government overreach, anything that was, I felt, weaponized against the people. I ran on pushing back and fighting against that. Conservative principles, Christian values. I was an educator of 9 years. I ran on getting things out of the classroom that shouldn't be there. Expelling corruption at the heart of it is what I campaigned on.
Right.
So my teaching experience, my experience with government overreach was hands-on experience that I felt equipped me to be able to speak on the floor and run legislation from a place of experience, not just something I'm reading somewhere or something like this.
So I want to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back because I want to lead in with what you're just talking about in the education side of this. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, be right back.
Yep.
All right, welcome back to the third and final segment of the Scars podcast with Gabe, and I want to just reiterate real quick what I think Governor Stitt has done some fantastic work in Oklahoma. It's been great to have him.
Absolutely.
I think he's a godly man. I know it. I've seen him talk. I've met him, met his wife, wonderful people. And so I think he's always conscientious about things like what you're going through.
Yeah, and we have had conversations with the governor. I've been to lots of prayer meetings with him. I do speak with his office quite a bit. I think he has many conservative values. I think he's done a lot of great things. And so as a conservative, I work with him on a lot of things. I'm very grateful to a lot of the things he's done for our economy. He's a great businessman. Yeah. You know, when I talk to him in person, he's friendly, he's approachable. He often reaches out to state representatives and state senators for their insight because we're boots on the ground in our district. So I have enjoyed my experience in the legislature with Governor Stitt, and I do believe him to be, you know, a true Republican. There are some things we disagree on. That's everybody. That's why there's 149 of us, you know, 101 state reps, 48 senators, and the governor. You're going to differ in some areas, and then you want to balance each other out and have checks and balances. If everybody thought the same thing exactly all the time, we would not have any diversity of thought, and we would be in a pretty bad place. But our relationship with Governor Stitt has been very good, and I'm appreciative to much of the work that he does. Very good, very good.
I want to get back into your story because there's as again, I say you're an expert witness because there's been so many things, that you've experienced. But I'm gonna start with when you grew up, and then how it transitioned into your same-sex relationships, and then back to more of a heterosexual type opposite sex. So go ahead and just fill us in there, and then lead into your occupation as a teacher.
Yeah, well, the documentary Trans Oklahoma Dark Side of the Rainbow, why I ended up becoming a co-director of that film is because of my own struggle with my own sexual identity. I was never transgender, never dealt with that, but I dealt with the homosexuality, same-sex attraction, and it's all related, right? It's all related to an attempt and a spiritual attack to try to displace and disrupt the nuclear family and to put men and women out of place to attempt to attack the image of Christ, which is human beings. And so I struggled from a very long age. There are some spiritual things, there are some mental things, right? And I believe that a person has, again, that traumatic experience in their life and that disconnects, perhaps in my case, with the masculine figure in my life. And so I embraced masculinity through other men and through myself to try to replace what I felt like subconsciously I didn't receive from my father. Again, he was in the home, they were married, he was a good father, mistakes were made, everybody makes mistakes. This is just a result kind of a spiritual attack and perhaps a lacking of that masculine role that I needed it in a certain way, which resulted in, once you hit puberty and sexuality is put on top of the trauma, you deal with sexual issues and potentially same-sex attraction. So I remember a number of things in the house in Michigan. We moved from Michigan when I was 5 and have lived in Oklahoma ever since. But my mom tells a story that I was too young to remember. She came into my sister and I's room, and there were gay porn magazines torn up, and she looked up and there was a hole in the ceiling. So apparently whoever lived there before us was looking at gay porn. So there was something spiritual in the house happening. In fact, there were, our dog would bark at things that weren't there. There was a dark presence in the room. She had our church come over and pray.
Wow.
One person said they even felt like they saw a demon almost go out the window when they were praying, kind of through the spiritual lens. Wow. So there was definitely something that came over me as a child from a very early age, as well as not having that strong masculine connection to my father growing up that leaned in towards an inclination and a stronger likelihood, it's not 100% likelihood of pursuing a homosexual lifestyle. And of course that was living as a double lifestyle, living as a Christian and a conservative, and really, truly having a relationship with Jesus and always being a conservative. It never sat well with me, and I never accepted it as my true identity. I always warred against it and struggled with it internally. I embraced it, and I had to live 2 separate lives. And I embraced it for a period of time in a secret life because I didn't know how to overcome it. I never have and never will believe someone is born gay. That's not true. There's no such thing as a gay gene. There are things that happen to us that impress upon us and that attack our intimacy through sexuality. The act of sex is created by God. It's a life-giving experience. If the enemy can get men attracted to men, women attracted to women, boys and girls mutilating their bodies, it can stop the procreation of life, or at least slow it down, along with abortion and other atrocities like this. The enemy's objective is to attack the image of God and to put men and women out of place so they cannot move forward and build the kingdom of God. The devil's never going to be able to stop that, but he can pull some people down and he can detour. And the Screw Tape Letters goes into great detail by C.S. Lewis about how he detours people and distracts them from the plan that God has and tries to put them in a spiraling cycle down so they cannot fulfill the promises that God has put on their life. But I struggled with my sexuality. There was another experience with a neighbor boy in elementary and middle school. He was very sexualized behavior. I was exposed to that, certainly. So, this neighbor boy that I would spend time with, we lived out in the country, so there weren't many kids out there, but we'd play out. We play outside. We didn't have electronics. We played in the dirt and in the mud and in the creek and stuff. But my parents didn't know this, obviously. But he had very sexualized behavior, and I was exposed to that as well. And I was also, because I felt like I was lacking some of those masculine attributes as a child, I was also bullied fourth grade all the way to senior year, called gay. People would always ask if I was gay. So I was surrounded by this sociology and the psychology calling me gay and affirming that in my life, speaking that over me constantly, along with lacking that masculine energy that I needed in my life and having a mother who I was much closer to, and so embracing the feminine more. I also grew up with 2 sisters. This can be detoured, I think, and interfered with in some cases. Even if you have a father in the home, what about the people that had a father in the home, didn't grow up to be gay, transgender?
Right. Yeah, give us the alternative to that.
I believe, and this is what this doctor that I had referenced earlier mentions, and we can insert his name and make sure we give him credit from the Lila Rose podcast. He also mentions that, well, what about people that maybe had problems with their father, boys that had problems with their father but didn't grow up to be gay? It's very likely that they had some or other masculine role model elsewhere. Older sibling, grandparent, coach, youth leader, were surrounded probably by other friends that were boys, and became an alternative to that masculinity that they needed to put them on the trajectory to not struggling with their sexual identity. And so there are ways that life and society can interfere with that. And I think, but if you don't have that interference strong enough in your life, there's the possibility that your sexuality could detour and go down that road if it's fostered internally and externally, a lot contributing to it. So eventually I warred internally with this. I struggled with pornography for a long time. And I continued to just be surrounded, and my brain continued to be exposed to things that would continue to affirm the same-sex attraction. By the time I hit puberty, you put puberty on top of that, and the sexual attraction is now adapting to what your brain had and the neural pathways that have been set forth in your brain, which in this case was an incline towards homosexuality and same-sex attraction. And so I'd never believed you were born gay, but I was tired of putting up a fight with it, so I gave into it. I always said, now your sin and your addictions, when you give into them, always want more. So the dopamine level of your brain, if you're pursuing pornography, eventually you're going to graduate onto a more dark or a different type of pornography, because eventually it's not good enough for your brain. Or you're going to graduate on from pornography and go on to sexual acts with people, because of the pornography is not enough anymore and your dopamine level is no longer increasing. So then you can move on to acts with other people. So I told myself, I struggled with pornography, with gay pornography, and I struggled with thoughts about other men and things like this, and I didn't know why. And the dopamine level wasn't good enough. So I always told myself, well, I'll never act upon something with another man. I can control it, I thought. But if you keep going down that road, the truth is you can't control it. And so I then eventually did find myself in a secret lifestyle with other men. I said, but I'll never date a man. I'll never go that far. I know I want to be married to a woman. I want to have a family. I've seen this modeled in my family. That is the true desire of my heart. That's what God has for me. I'll never take it that far. But then this experience with my family and my parents being falsely accused and arrested, and our lives were turned upside down and everything was taken from them. Interestingly enough, my father and I didn't even know it, but we were both reading the book of Job right before this all happened, where everything was taken from Job. Mm-hmm. My father lost his home, his job, his family. He was in jail, barely talk to anybody. It was very interesting how we were doing that, reading Job before this all took place. And so I went through that really hard and traumatic experience of my life and my family being torn apart for something that they didn't even do. And I was looking for a sense of escape to not have to dwell on it and think on it. And so I entered into, I was pursuing a secret homosexual lifestyle at this time, and met a guy who he had dated other men, very masculine guy. You would not know. Hence what we've talked about. Right. I would naturally, if I'm looking for masculinity, the preferred person that I would pursue would be a very masculine man. I'm trying to find that in my life, right? My brain is trying to find that, what I felt like I never could be, trying to find that in other people. Very masculine guy, but he had been in relationships with other men. It was a very unhealthy relationship. He was very persistent, very pressing, wanted to date, and I said I would never date a man. I would never take it that far. But remember, you can't control this once you give into it, if you continue to feed it. Mm-hmm. And so I eventually dated this person, and it was never physically abusive, but it was definitely very mentally, I would argue, very mentally abusive relationship, very unhealthy relationship. I knew it wasn't right. I knew I was never going to marry this person. I knew I wanted to marry a woman. I knew I was going to have a family, but I could at least temporarily give into what I wanted for now to distract myself from this terrible thing my family's going through, and deal with that in the courtroom when I'm in and out of the courtroom with my parents and visiting them in jail, but live this second life where everything seems great and I can just pursue whatever I want and I don't have to think about this, So I'm in this relationship, this same-sex relationship. It's a very unhealthy relationship, but it continues to take me down that road of perversion and of just the twisting of the way men and women were meant to be. But it was very eye-opening. I think I needed to go through that. I think God knew I was going to go through that, because here I am talking to you right now on the other end of it. So struggled with that, left that relationship behind, continued to struggle with my sexuality. And a couple of years ago, God really brought me in a place, and I had gotten counseling and talked to people, and I eventually had come forward with my family and told them about my struggles. And they knew, but they were waiting for God to say it was the right time. They weren't going to pressure me. They prayed for me. They loved me. They never affirmed it, never said it was true, but they were waiting for God's timing. And therefore, God's timing, he pressed on my heart to tell them. And they were very understanding, not accepting of it, not affirming of it, but very understanding, and they loved me, and nothing. Our family actually became much stronger and closer after that, after I came forward with my same-sex attraction and my struggles and things like this. And so I continued down that path of seeking counseling and accountability for myself and working on myself. I stopped avoiding conflict. I stopped running away from my problems. I even got a tattoo that says, "I'll stay." And it has it in Hebrew too. Meaning I will not run away and avoid conflict anymore. I will stay, and I will go through the fire, and I will deal with it. Mm-hmm. And so I did. And they were going to make this, they made this documentary about my family, Saving Clayton. It's on YouTube. The same producers then wanted to make one about the transgender issue. And I said, well, you're making a documentary about sexual identity and about warped identity and about an identity crisis. I've dealt with that, never as a transgender, but through same-sex attraction. I would love to help you make this film. And they were like, you should absolutely help us make this film. It was going to be a small project. I was going to be on site dealing with some of the editing and things, but I ended up becoming a co-director. I ended up directing where things would be, how they would look, how you can rephrase it and say it so the audience can understand it better. I was able to do things I wanted to pursue in media as well. It was another opportunity God brought. So I made this movie with them called Trans Oklahoma, Dark Side of the Rainbow, also on YouTube. And we told the story of detransitioners. And that was the first time I had ever told anyone that wasn't either. So there were people in my secret homosexual lifestyle that I could tell, obviously, because that was my second life and I didn't worry about that. My family had finally found out. And this was the first person I told that was a friend, one of the first persons the people I told that was a friend about my own struggles, and they wanted to bring me on as a part of this project. So God slowly started to expose what was happening in the dark in my life to the light, and then use it for his good and his glory and to build his kingdom. And so I made this film, and then I was more comfortable talking about my own story, and then I came forward publicly with my own story, and they made a short film about a 35-minute interview where I tell from A to Z my story of same-sex attraction and struggling and why that was. Went public with that. It's still on YouTube. It's called Identity Complex Part 2, I think. And after that, a little while after that, maybe a year or two after that, I was involved in politics, and I would go to school board meetings, and I was a teacher, and I was involved in my students' education. I was very outspoken against the things we saw in the classroom to protect my students.
That's what I wanted to ask is because touch on this topic, but leading up to that, you said you were at a rental house or at a house where there was some material of gay pornography, and you saw it at a very young age.
Yeah, under the age of 5 in Michigan. Yeah.
So tell us the effects that you think that has on seeing something like that, and then transition that to what you see that.
Children today.
Yeah, in the schools themselves.
Yeah, so when you have a child and their brain is developing, I believe, I could get this wrong, but I believe typically up until the age of 25, and women's brains develop faster and mature more than men. And so when you're in that age, under 25 or under the age of 30, but especially as children, your brains are very influential. My brain obviously clung on to that experience I had where I was exposed to that gay pornography. And there was another experience where I saw...
It kind of sears into the brain, doesn't it?
And I can recall one incident that my parents were in a meeting, and I was watching TV in the other room so they could have their meeting, and I was just watching TV and flip through the channels, and there's a scene of a male stripper on screen. That image is seared into my brain.
Yeah.
I can see it right now.
How old were you then? Do you remember?
I would have had to have been in elementary school.
So it's past 5, so you had that experience in 5.
in Oklahoma, yeah.
Yeah, and
my parents were not aware of this. My parents were very careful. We didn't have internet. They just didn't know. Sometimes you don't know.
Right.
My parents were always very proactive and very careful, and they had blockers, and they had things in place. They knew sexual trauma could be very dangerous for children. They were very careful about that, but the enemy still finds his way to creep in.
Sure.
And so I have these images seared in my brain. So when I think about when I worked with students, the things that they would see in these books or on social media and things like this, I knew from my own experience that would impact their brain. that would create an image in their brain.
Mm-hmm.
Their mind would dwell on it and think about it, and it would take them down had the potential to take them down a certain path. So I was very careful as a teacher with things that we discussed and I would allow into my classroom. I had very strict policies about certain things, and I had very careful conversations with parents, which is the most important. The most important stakeholder in a child's education is the parent.
What were you seeing though? Like, what were some of the stuff you're like? I mean, I follow Pastor John Amachuco, he's awesome, man. What a warrior to go out there in front of school boards and read the books that he's literally getting out of their libraries and reading them. And they said, you can't read that. It's too offensive.
Right.
What were you seeing? What type of material, topic matter?
Yeah, I mean, there were political things all the way to like sexualized content. There were classrooms with pride flags and Black Lives Matter flags, racially divisive and sexualized things in the classroom that I had seen that were reported to me and that I had reported to the State Department of Education for the safety of children. And I when I was working at a school in Tulsa, there was a book. We came back, I took my 5th graders to the library to get their library book for the week. And we're having a lesson and I'm putting them on an individual assignment and they're working quietly. And I walk over to one of my students' desks and I see a book on her desk after we came back from the library. And on the cover, there are 2 boys making out. And I was like, what is this? And so as a teacher, you don't want to shame or traumatize children. So you don't say, what is this book? Why is this? You don't. This student was on an individual assignment. I just quietly removed the book from her desk, put it on my desk and put a cover over it. And I said, I'm going to send you down to the library to get a different book.
So she got this book from...
She had already seen it.
From the library.
Yeah, she had already been reading it. She was already exposed to it. But you have to be careful with how you work with children. And at the end of the day, the parent is the one that makes the decision. So I contacted the parent. And, I'm sorry, I sent pictures. Your child was already reading this book. They've already been exposed to it. I was not aware of it. I contacted the principal. They had the books removed.
They did?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. My principal at the school was very conservative. Yes.
Okay, so answer this. And it's funny.
How did the book get there?
Yeah. Who oversees these books?
Okay, so here's how the book got there. He ended up putting me to be like the investigator of this because he knew I was passionate about it, and we were in line, and he just said, "Can you figure out?" Yeah, and so we went and talked to the librarian at this school and asked how the book could get there, and we found out that because there's a system online where all the books are kept and the administration can see it. How did it bypass this system? And was it there and someone didn't catch it? It turns out that Scholastic, the company that brings the book fairs in and sells books to kids, after some books didn't sell, gave a box of books directly to the librarian and she put them directly on the shelf. It came from Scholastic Book Fair. That is how the book
interesting investigation.
Yeah. And so it bypassed administration. No one knew.
Wow.
But a child found it and was reading it. And so Scholastic, I mean, you can dig in. They have LGBTQ stuff throughout their website. And so it's not a group that schools should be partnering with for children. There are better alternatives. And so that's basically what it came to, that the librarian didn't want to give this book up. She literally clung the book to her chest and said, "Can I take it home and keep it for myself?" And I was just
my goodness.
I was just like, what is going on? Anyway, and there are
I'm going to interject. Sorry, but you probably need to lose your job. I'm not sorry. If that's the way you feel, then that's gonna work its way back in there.
Yeah, I mean, that attitude is potentially a dangerous attitude. I don't know what they could do about if she wanted to keep it personally. I don't know. But yes, you're correct. I think that should be very questionable if you were in the authority to make a decision on that. You'd probably have to get deeper evidence on something. But yeah, I would not be okay with that. I think something should have been done, potentially more on that issue. But I don't know if it was.
So when I went to school, it was a long time ago, but we talked about sex education. It was basic biology.
Yeah.
This is how it works. This is X, Y, XX. This is what you do to procreate. We weren't introduced to any kind of, well, here's how you do this with this same sex.
Fantasizing.
Or fantasy.
Yeah.
There you go. No fantasy.
Idolizing it.
Yes. Why the push? Is it the teachers union? Did the teachers union have an agenda to sexualize our children earlier? And I'm going to lead into things that they don't talk about.
In part, yeah, the teachers unions foster a lot of this.
Now you're getting me hot, man. You leave the kids alone, dang it.
Teachers unions, Oklahoma-based unions, and federal national unions that work with each other. Yeah, a lot of it certainly comes in and is fostered through that, certainly. But there's a number of ways that it comes in. And it all goes back to feelings versus logic. They don't want to hurt someone's feelings. If you feel this way, it must be true, and we should make the rest of society conform to it and accept it, which is a violation of my conscience and my rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and my constitutional rights to try to force me to say something and use preferred pronouns and go against biology and science, which I will never do.
Yep.
That is a violation of my constitutional rights. If you think that you're transgender and you want to refer to yourself as he, she, they, them, you have at it. I will not. I will not participate. I will not feed into your mental illness. I will not damage you by affirming a lie that is dangerous to your psyche and feeding into that mental illness that everybody else then has to deal with, much like the shooting we just saw with the Catholic school church.
Right. 100%. Okay. Tell us what PragerU is.
So PragerU is kind of like a think tank group that was is creating content and trying to get back to the basics and trying to protect and preserve history and accurate information. From the videos that I've seen and what I've utilized in my classroom in Oklahoma, PragerU is a good resource that's pushing back on what people call the woke ideology. Woke is this term where people feel like they've had some revelation and they're awakened to the reality that everything is a conspiracy against you and everything is racist and everything is against and in favor of capitalism and in favor of white men, and everyone is either a oppressor or oppressed, and you are entitled to certain things because of something you've experienced or some ideology or some victim mentality that they've said you're now entitled to certain things over other people, which then instills racism and prejudice back into society if we choose to embrace that.
Sure.
So it's very dangerous, this woke ideology where they think they've been awakened to some revelation and they just see it different than everybody else because they've been awakened. And so this woke ideology has become this gender theory, queer theory, has become extreme racial division, Black Lives Matter 1619 Project, things that are twisting and changing of history. So PragerU is trying to just get back to the basics and say, no, this is what history tells us through documentation, and we're going to stick to what the documentation says, and we're going to bring in context clues and education-based things. I've shown the Christopher Columbus video in my classroom. I've walked through and posted on social media step by step how this is a good tool for the classroom, what it does. But the emotional argument from the left has been so strong that they don't want to have the rational conversation. They can't get over their emotions they're feeling to sit and have a conversation about and actually hear you out and consider what you're saying. So that's the problem we're seeing in the classroom. PragerU is trying to counteract that and provide a safe outlet. Because I've been a teacher in the classroom and I've worked with other teachers in the classroom, and my students, when one time they were taking a test and a student was on a Cool Math game, the website's called Cool Math because he was done with his test, and a Victoria's Secret ad comes up. And so if you use an outlet like PragerU, you don't get those ads that YouTube and Cool Math get. It's a safe website of its own with no ads. And so that's one reason that I started to use it, because I knew I didn't have to worry about something popping up on screen in front of my students. And so it was also a reliable source that had historical context and references that we could trace things back to. And so I used it for the safety of my students. And I knew that there wouldn't be any of this questionable, potentially dangerous ideology coming in. Of course, people say that PragerU is political and it's a conservative outlet. What's conservative and what's considered far right today is just common sense and logic. But it's just the left has gone so far to the left that they now challenge what's normal and say that that's far right and conservative. It's actually just science, history, facts, and reality that people don't want to grapple with because they feel uncomfortable about it.
So I watched an interview with you and you were on MSNBC, and they were having, I think it was in MSNBC.
MSNBC, yeah.
And they were interviewing you about PragerU, and they were certainly positioning it towards, well, that's clearly not true about Christopher Columbus and things. And you were coming back with information like, yeah, that actually is more true than what is taught where I was formerly teaching. And then they had a kiddo with their parents, and the kiddo was talking about, what did you think?
Oh, this was NBC.
NBC. Okay, yeah, I couldn't remember. So
this was about 2 years ago.
Yeah, and what was the funniest thing is if I read it right, the little girl was so innocent. It felt like it was a hit piece against you for teaching it. And in the end, the little girl goes, that was pretty interesting. I liked it.
My opinion, it looks like she was coached. This is what you're going to say.
Yeah.
That's my opinion.
Yeah. So, but she slipped, and she said, well, I don't know if she slipped, but it felt like she was going, but it was fun to learn. And I think they allowed to say that. I could have read it wrong. I could, but almost to say, oh my gosh, see, the kids are saying,
children are grabbing onto this.
yeah, children are grabbing onto it. They're grabbing onto this lie. Oh, it's dangerous. We can't have PragerU in there. But the alternative is they would say, well, what do you think about teaching the Tulsa race riots, and how is that function? And I think, well, that's something that does need to be taught. That it was a horrible situation.
Yeah, interesting. The Tulsa Race Massacre didn't come up in my curriculum as a history teacher, so I wrote a lesson plan for it and intentionally taught it every year.
So it wasn't in there.
Well,
and you taught.
It could come later at a different grade, but I have no way of knowing that. So to make sure that they did learn about it, because it's important part of Oklahoma's history, I always made sure to teach it at least for one day or two.
So what I find interesting is the people that are critics against this is they'll bring up things like, that, like, why don't we teach more about that? Is Prager going to say that? Well, you address that. One thing they don't address, and I don't know why, is the fact that, racism is something that, yes, awful. And I can't wait for the day that it's completely gone. But I believe as Morgan Freeman said one time, if you want to get rid of it, stop talking about it.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So what we don't talk about is the fact that there's an epidemic right now with 800,000 kids disappearing in the United States.
Yeah, human trafficking. Yeah.
Where are they going, and why is that not a topic that we're going to teach on, talk about current issues?
So why are we not talking about modern day slavery? Look, we should always talk. We should always talk about the history of slavery. We should never erase that. We should always continue to talk about it, but we should also simultaneously be talking about modern day slavery. I don't know how you. I'm not advocating that we bring that into the classroom one way or another. I don't know. I'm not a teacher anymore. There could be a way. I'm sure universities hopefully would be studying that. And how you would have safe conversations, but parents should definitely be having the conversation with them.
That's a good point. I say what's an appropriate time frame for that to happen.
Yeah.
That's a great point. But however, it should happen.
Yeah, absolutely. But that doesn't fit the narrative that MSNBC and NBC desire. They are a media company and they rely on controversy for clicks and likes and views, because we have to constantly be in some sort of ideology war to keep things interesting.
So you think that the reason they don't bring it up is because they know that both sides might agree on it. So this is a problem.
I think if you were thinking rationally and logically and connecting the dots and just reading documented history, it's pretty dry, cut, and straightforward. It's not complicated.
Well, the one thing that I look at right now, and I know that Generation Z is looking at a lot, is like what they see, and they want to see. We want something moral, something just, something we can believe in our political realm. The Epstein list just disappearing. That's a problem for those guys. They're on fire for truth right now.
Yeah.
They're turning back to. What is it? What is American values? No matter what color they are, they're all turning back. They want to know. They're on fire for Jesus right now. At least to learn about Jesus. If we don't do a good job, our age.
Yeah.
I'm 50. About 51. I'm presuming you're
30.
30. So, but you're. If we, how many people, you're in a state representative, what's your average age group right now in that arena?
For voting or state reps? Or state representatives, most of them are 50 years or older. There's a few younger.
So if we don't start pulling these guys into this conversation and making them part of Charlie Kirk is doing a fantastic job with TPUSA. I love what he's doing there. He's drawing more and more people, and more, when he first started going to the campuses, He couldn't even hardly sit on the campus without being spit on, thrown cups at him, things like that.
But things are shifting.
Things are definitely shifting. Yeah. It's fascinating. How can what you're doing? How can kids get more? Like I say, kids. I mean, it's my son, 19 to
young adults.
Yeah, young adults. How can they get more involved?
Turning Point USA is doing really good work because they're not just getting into universities; they're getting into high schools too. So they're starting earlier, and you're already in there, and you're talking about history and politics and learning at that age too. So it's good to hear both sides and to have what your family lean towards and what you lean towards, having an opportunity for that with Turning Point USA and resources like other resources too, and being able to have those Republican clubs in your school and things like this. But we got to get more people involved, because what I see in the GOP, like the GOP party, people that actually show up to the party and get involved with the Republican Party.
Are you a fan of the two-party system, right? Or no?
There are pros and cons, but I mean, I'm a conservative because of my Christian values, and conservatism aligns more with biblical principles.
Right.
So it's because of I follow Christ, and this party checks the majority of those boxes, that I'm a conservative and can never be a Democrat. The modern day Democrat Party is a death cult.
Thanks for saying that. I don't see how you.
They kill babies in the womb for convenience.
Yes.
They are in favor of transgender children
Mutilation
who can no
of the-
longer procreate.
Yep.
They are proponents of same-sex attraction and same-sex marriage, which does not bring forth life.
Right.
It's death.
Mm-hmm.
It's against life. It's against creation. The modern day Democrat Party, which I believe is a demonic. I believe there is a demonic movement, and for some reason, we generally have seen the Democrat Party come in alignment with that more.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying Republicans are perfect. There are some. I'm not a fan of the Bush family.
I would say there's
I don't
unfortunately.
I don't like warmongers.
Yeah, I mean, because the church has gotten so lukewarm. If the church would stand up and really teach the Bible, then a lot of this stuff would resolve itself. But it's weak.
Yeah, well,
by and large.
If the church doesn't stand up and do something, the world is going to fill that void. It will not
Yep.
remain empty. So because Christians haven't stood up, case in point, in Tulsa, we've had Democrat mayors for a long time. Tulsa's a liberal festering city, so is Oklahoma City. Why is that when all 77 counties of Oklahoma are Republican and voted for Donald Trump? Why is it that we still have these liberal hot spots where things are happening in the classroom more frequently, where we can't move school board elections, or where we can't move school board elections to get more voters out to flip it to Republican, the school boards and the city councils? Why is it that we're seeing more Democrats, and you'll look at the representatives and the senators, there's only few of them that are Democrats. They're from Tulsa and Oklahoma City and Norman. So it's either a university town. We know the universities and what they do, and we know there are major cities, generally more liberal, more social, borderline socialist. And so we see that influence, and we also have a problem in the state legislature with Republicans not actually voting conservative. And so we're paying the price for that. Certainly, we could certainly be more conservative state, but we are a super majority Republican state, but yet we still have, Oklahoma's no exception to all these things happening in the classroom, happening in politics, gender ideology, racial division, taking place all the time. So it's still a problem.
Yeah, well, Charlie Kirk brings up a good point that sometimes it's the worst states for voting are the red states, because we don't really look into who the candidate is.
No one pays attention because they're like as
they don't
long
pay
as
attention to their values or anything that they voted on before.
the most important election in Oklahoma that you're ever going to vote in and pay attention to is going to be the Republican primary, where you pick the Republican candidate.
That's right.
It's in most districts and in most counties. In the end, it's going to be a Republican. The question is, which Republican? Is it going to be a conservative Christian Republican? Is it going to be a registered Republican who does not exercise conservative or biblical values on legislation or in committee? That's going to make or break Oklahoma.
Yeah. Well, again, if you could quote some of your YouTubes that you have real quick at the end, just where could they go find your documentaries?
Yeah, you guys can find me on social media. Gabe Woolley, X, formerly known as Twitter, is Gabe, GABEG WOOLLEY. Instagram and Facebook is Gabe Woolley. All my profiles are public, and you can go to rescueclayton.com and you can watch the documentary. You can go to the link in all my bios, and all the documentaries we've done and all the projects and all the interviews I've done are all linked all on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at the top of my profile. We'll be working on some other projects pretty soon. We'll be running more legislation. Some of that is in the works, but I'm available on social media for people to connect. And I encourage transparency. So I try to model that through. People ask, why am I so active on social media as an elected official? I was like, that is a free way to let your constituents know what you're working on, what you're doing. And you don't have to pay for the mailer. That is a free communication to the people, and it's a tool that should be used for transparency.
It's unadulterated too, right? It doesn't get scripted. It doesn't get modified, anything like that.
It's straight from me.
Yeah, you can have an open comment. If you want to DM you can DM you. You know, so that's fine, and that's great. Well, thanks so much, Gabe. I really appreciate you making the drive and coming down here and seeing us in Oklahoma City. And man, we're gonna keep watching and see how you do. I appreciate your passion and for God and family and country.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, thanks a lot.
Yeah.